مساء الخير وأهلا بكم إلى حلقة جديدة من واشنطن أونلاين. معي أنا هدي العويس على شبكة نورث بريس. أحداث ومتغيرات إقليمية ودولية يبدو أنها تلعب في صالح الإدارة الذاتية. نبحث هذا الموضوع مع شاهدة على ما يحدث ويقال حول سوريا داخل أروقة صناعة القرار في الولايات المتحدة، كما أنها شهدت على تغيرات وتطورات المنطقة حيث كانت مؤخرا في زيارة لشمال شرق سوريا. وضيفتي لهذه الحلقة هي السيدة ميغان بوديت، رئيسة قسم الأبحاث في معهد السلام الكردي في الولايات المتحدة. أهلا وسهلا بك سيدة ميغان.
Thank you for having me.
شكرا لوجودك معنا ميغان. إذا متغيرات كثيرة اليوم، واسم سوريا يعود مجددا إلى دائرة الاهتمام هنا في العاصمة واشنطن، وطبعا بسبب موضوع وتطور أساسي وهو عودة العلاقات العربية مع دمشق حتى السعودية بكل ما لها ثقل إقليمي اليوم. بدأت بمد جسور التواصل مع النظام السوري من جديد. كيف ممكن أن تؤثر عودة العلاقات هذه والتي هي محل انتقاد في واشنطن على منطقة شمال شرق سوريا ومستقبل الإدارة الذاتية؟
So this is happening right now in large part because the United States does not have a strategy in Syria. And so as a result of this, we're seeing even countries that are allied with the US and that have previously been opposed to the Syrian government's recapture of the country now adjusting to the realities on the ground of the fact that the government has been able to recapture a significant amount of territory and pursuing normalization. And this could be risky for the Northeast. Right now, Northeast Syria is the only stable alternative to a complete government retakeover of all of Syrian territory, something that would be very destabilizing and very dangerous for the millions of Syrians who would be subjected to a return to the kind of very violent authoritarian rule that they faced prior to 2011. But at the same time, this should also be a time of opportunity. One, the United States can say to its partners that if you're going to normalize, you need to get something out of it. That can be something that can be used to press the regime to make concessions and abandon its attitude towards the Northeast that has called for essentially a destruction of autonomy there and a return to the pre-2011 status quo. And two, it should be a wake-up call here in Washington, and in my opinion it is, that if we want to see a future for Syria that is remotely based on some kind of political solution, that has any kind of concessions incorporated into a future government that benefit the Syrian people, including Kurds, including other ethnic and religious minorities, that there needs to be a strong, stable, and prosperous Northeast, free from the risk of renewed violence and conflict. And I think from some of what we're seeing in terms of the U.S. maintaining its opposition to a Turkish incursion and talking about, maintaining the importance of the presence there and diplomatic activity there and looking at what kind of strategy is necessary, that's something that's really important. Unfortunately, right now, based on what I've seen on the ground there, it seems as though the U.S. needs to get a strategy in line and start taking action sooner rather than later, because ultimately freezing the conflict and hoping for the best, like the U.S. has been doing now, isn't going to work and is going to lead to increased normalization.
عودة العلاقات بين الدول العربية ودمشق تجري برعاية روسية، وأيضا للصين طبعا دور كبير أيضا في هذا التقارب الأخير بين الدول العربية وإيران. هل تخشى واشنطن من هذه المتغيرات وتجعلها تشعر أن وجودها في شمال شرق سوريا هي ورقة أكثر أهمية اليوم وورقة ربما توضع في إطار التنافس الدولي بين القوى الكبرى؟
I think that unfortunately, we've seen the U.S. pursuing a military-first strategy in the Middle East that has been destabilizing, that has led to contributing to a lot of conflicts instead of ending conflicts. And while we're seeing increased diplomatic activity from other major powers like China, like Russia, and also from Arab states, also from Iran, from regional powers, this needs to be a wake-up call to the United States that what's needed in Syria right now is diplomacy. Because a permanent military presence in Syria focused on counter ISIS, while certainly ensuring the defeat of ISIS is important, is simply not something that's going to lead to a stable future. There has to be a plan for diplomacy, there has to be a strategy, and there has to be a goal of how do we get to a political solution that preserves stability in the region and that addresses the root causes of conflict in Syria and in the broader area, so that 10 years from now, the US doesn't have to intervene again. I think that this should also be a wake-up call in the sense that we're now seeing some opposition in Congress to the US military presence in Syria. They're asking quite rightly, what's the goal? What's the long-term outcome? And although their plan to immediately withdraw would also have destabilizing impacts, right now we're seeing this debate because there's no one in Washington who has a plan for a political solution. And that's something that's unfortunate, but I do think could change in the near future.
ما هو الحل السياسي اللي ممكن أن ترعاه واشنطن في سوريا اليوم، وبالاستفادة أيضا من علاقات الدول العربية اليوم المتغيرة والمتطورة مع دمشق؟ يعني هناك شركاء للولايات المتحدة اليوم بدأوا بمد جسور مع دمشق. كيف يمكن للولايات المتحدة من خلال هذه التطورات أن تصيغ هذا الحل الدبلوماسي الذي فشلت إدارات أوباما وترامب والآن بايدن في التوصل إليه؟
This is true, and I think that Washington needs to start by being realistic. What's realistic right now is that the only alternative to a complete regime return to all of the country and an imposition of a pre-2011 status quo by the government is a strong, stable, and prosperous northeast Syria. And the SDF and the Autonomous Administration, while not perfect, have been successful, and they have made the best of the conditions that they're in to provide not only security in terms of the defeat of ISIS, but a real model for governance that includes women, that includes ethnic and religious minorities, and that brings in as many perspectives as possible. So strengthening that model and ensuring that in diplomatic activity, the Northeast gets the best status that it can, and can, ensure some of its principles about pluralism, about equality, about inclusion can be implemented across Syria in the event of some kind of a political solution. That's something that's very important. The existence of the Northeast and the plans that they've put forward in their own communications of what they'd need to see from the Syrian government in order to come to some sort of political settlement, that can be a huge asset, not only for the millions of people who live in the Northeast and want to protect the achievements that they have in terms of governance and in terms of security, but for all Syrians who want to see a status quo that involves something better than we have. And related to that, in order to ensure the status of the Northeast as this counter to an uncontested Assad victory, the US needs to get serious about dealing with Turkey. A political solution in Syria isn't going to include Syria alone. It's also going to have to include political engagement on the wider Turkish-Kurdish conflict and the Kurdish issue in Turkey, which is the reason why Turkey is intervening in this destabilizing way against northeast Syria in a way that's honestly helping Assad in a way that's very unpredictable.
نعم، مثل ما ذكرتي ميغان، يعني طبعا المسألة الكردية باتت مرتبطة ارتباطا وثيقا اليوم بالمسألة السورية وبالحل النهائي الذي يمكن للولايات المتحدة أن ترعاه فيما يتعلق بسوريا. كان هناك إعلان مؤخرا من حزب العمال الكردستاني لتمديد وقف إطلاق النار مع تركيا. حزب العمال الكردستاني يريد تمديد هذه الهدنة. كيف ممكن يعني هذه التحركات، إذا وصفناها بأنها نوايا حسنة من حزب العمال الكردستاني، أن تؤثر على خيارات تركيا فيما يتعلق بسوريا وشمال شرق سوريا تحديدا؟
Yes, absolutely. And my understanding is that one of the reasons why this ceasefire was declared was because the PKK wants to do as much as it can to promote de-escalation in the Northeast in order to help that region secure the autonomy and security for its people that it's been trying to secure. So if we take it back to November of last year, 2022, when there was the bombing in Istanbul that Turkey, without evidence, blamed on Kurdish groups, and then Turkish air operations in northeastern Syria that were very destabilizing, that cost civilian lives and targeted SDF forces engaged in critical counter-ISIS missions. I think this shocked not only the United States and forced the United States to realize that its policy on northeast Syria and its opposition to a Turkish invasion in words only was not enough, but I think also in terms of the PKK's thinking, it made them realize the dangers of even perceived military activity in Turkey, because it allowed Turkey to pin something that they did not do, and that certainly the SDF did not do, on Kurdish groups without evidence in this way because of active PKK military operations in Turkey. And so I think while the ceasefire was declared as a humanitarian measure after the earthquake, it seems as though one of the things that was incorporated in their thinking behind taking this very important step towards de-escalation was trying to keep political pressure off of northeast Syria, make it more difficult for Turkey to find a pretext to invade, and to make it easier for countries like the US to continue to oppose a Turkish incursion because the threat of any PKK military activity in Turkey is now something that Turkey cannot claim is a threat because the group has declared a ceasefire within Turkish territory. So I think that this is very much connected to taking the pressure off northeast Syria, particularly prior to the elections, when there's a lot of fear that there would be an incursion. And I think that while unfortunately Turkey has not responded to this ceasefire and the international community has not put the pressure on them to respond to this ceasefire that a lot of people would like to have seen, Turkey has not launched a new military incursion into northeast Syria. They're continuing operations in Iraqi Kurdistan, and they're unfortunately continuing with drone strikes and airstrikes, as well as provocations on the ceasefire lines. But there has been no incursion yet, and I think that shows that this step towards de-escalation was something very strategic and very valuable for the Northeast.
ميغن، كنت مؤخرا في زيارة هي الثانية لك لشمال شرق سوريا، وكنت في أربيل وعدة مدن أخرى في المنطقة. كيف تقيمين الأوضاع اليوم في شمال شرق سوريا كزائرة؟ هل تتطور الأوضاع؟ هل يشعر الناس بالأمان؟ يعني الوجود الأمريكي لا يزال مستمر في المنطقة، ولكن هناك استهدافات بالطيران المسير. كيف يشعر الناس في المنطقة اليوم؟
Well, I'll say the number one word that I heard from people over there on the subject of U.S. policy was uncertainty. People don't know what the United States is going to do. People know that there's not a strategy, and they see how bad actors like Turkey, like ISIS, like Iran, that want to destroy the autonomy of the Northeast and, displace people from the Northeast and target their political project, are exploiting this lack of strategy by stepping up their operations and contributing to a lot of destabilizing security threats. I heard a lot about the economic situation, which is unfortunately very difficult. Despite a sanctions exemption for the Northeast and parts of the Northwest that was rolled out last year, people on the ground aren't seeing the benefits. And in fact, many people tell me that because of the impact of remaining US sanctions on Syria, they feel that Syrians in the Northeast are actually suffering more from sanctions than the regime officials that the sanctions were meant to target. So the economic situation is very difficult. As was mentioned, the drone strikes. This is a serious problem and something where people were very critical of the US tolerance of these strikes, because they not only target competent and capable SDF and autonomous administration leaders, but they also create a climate of fear due to Turkey's willingness to strike its targets in populated civilian areas. This is something that has contributed to a lot of fear and a lot of tension. I visited some villages and towns on the borders and the front lines around Kobani, around AANES, around Tal Tamr, and people are living in a state of insecurity and uncertainty. They don't know if they have a future. They worry about sending their kids to school. They worry about if they want to start a business, will their business last? Will they lose everything in another invasion? And those simply aren't sustainable circumstances. But all of that said, the people remain very resilient and very committed to preserving what they have, building on it, and improving their system to be even better under these very difficult circumstances. And I think it's that sense of improvement and progress and willingness to keep moving forward that's always been Northeast Syria's greatest asset. The participation of the people and their willingness to build that project under really harsh conditions is the reason that the Northeast has survived so long. And so they've done their part. They have guaranteed security the best they could. They have built a system of governance that's working. And it's really now time for the US to find a strategy that protects the autonomy of Northeast Syria, that works towards a political solution in the Northeast that can benefit all the people there and all Syrians, and that addresses this conflict with Turkey in order to remove one of the most destabilizing elements of the situation in Northeast Syria, that's not only very negatively affecting civilians there, but giving opportunities to ISIS and giving opportunities to the regime.
ميغن، ذكرتي العامل الاقتصادي وهو عامل مهم جدا. يعني اليوم هو هم يؤرق كل الناس في سوريا وأيضا في شمال شرق سوريا، رغم وجود موارد في المنطقة ورغم الأخبار الكبيرة الهامة العام الماضي عن استثناءات منحتها الحكومة الأمريكية للمناطق الخارجة عن سيطرة نظام الأسد. لماذا لم تعمل هذه الاستثناءات؟ لماذا لم تؤثر إيجابا على الاقتصاد في شمال شرق سوريا؟ هل السبب هو التهديدات التركية التي تصاعدت خلال العام الماضي، أم أن شبكة العقوبات هي معقدة إلى درجة يصعب استثناء أي منطقة سورية من هذه العقوبات؟
Those are both absolute factors contributing to the inefficacy of this decision. Many of the sanctions on Syria are very broad and difficult to exempt in terms of geographic regions. And you also see a lot of overcompliance from companies that might legally be allowed to operate, but because the situation is unclear, they choose not to. You also have the sense of insecurity and uncertainty created by Turkish threats. And I think we all have to recognize that just days after the US issued the general license, Erdogan began making threats to launch a new military incursion into northeast Syria. A lot of people on the ground tell me they don't think that's a coincidence, and I don't think that's a coincidence either, because Turkey knows, like the US knows, that the better the economy is in northeast Syria, the more prosperous people are, the more they're able to create an economic basis for success. The more that region will succeed in terms of security, will attract support from other communities, from people in other parts of Syria, and will be able to withstand ISIS attempts to regroup, a Turkish incursion or Turkish threats, and regime pressure to remove the autonomous administration. So Turkey knows that economic strength is important in the Northeast. And really all of the adversaries that the Northeast has know this too and exploit the bad economic situation. I heard a lot about how ISIS cells are benefiting from poverty caused by the bad economic situation by paying people to recruit. This is contributing to ISIS activity. You know, I've heard that the regime recruits in the same way, benefiting from the poverty and economic insecurity that exists in the Northeast. So this is something that's really dangerous, and I think something that we know the US issued that general license because they understand the importance of economic success to security success in the Northeast. And now it's time for them to understand why this hasn't been able to be implemented in practice.
نعم.
And to take steps to address that.
نعم، وخاصة يعني هنا أريد أن أوضح نقطة سيدة ميغان، هي أن الاستثناءات الأمريكية من العقوبات حاولت خلق البيئة المناسبة لتحسين الاقتصاد في شمال شرق سوريا، ولكن في النهاية الحكومة الأمريكية غير قادرة على دفع الشركات للاستثمار في شمال شرق سوريا. الشركات الأمريكية هي شركات خاصة وتلحق مصالحها في نهاية المطاف وتلحق البيئة الآمنة. ومثل ما ذكرتي تركيا حاولت زعزعة الثقة الاقتصاد في شمال شرق سوريا وقدرة الشركات على الاستثمار، ربما هذا ما قلل من قيمة هذه الاستثناءات. سؤالي الأخير لك سيدة ميغان هو حول مقابلة أجريتها حضرتك مؤخرا مع القيادي في حزب العمال الكردستاني جميل بايق، وهي كانت مقابلة تحدث من خلالها السيد بايق عبر منظمتكم إلى المتابع الأمريكي. كيف ينظر اليوم المجتمع السياسي في واشنطن إلى العلاقة مع حزب العمال الكردستاني وإلى حزب العمال الكردستاني كما هو عليه اليوم في عام 2023؟
People are realizing now that there is not a military solution to this conflict, and that the policies that the United States has pursued for the past 4 decades that have involved supporting the most militarist and nationalist wings of the Turkish state in their unsuccessful attempts to not only defeat the PKK militarily, but to commit really war crimes and serious human rights abuses against Kurdish communities in Turkey and beyond Turkey's borders, that this has not only not been successful, but it has only led to more conflict, to the deterioration of governance in Turkey, to systemic human rights abuses, and to a whole host of other problems that we're now seeing regionally and internationally. We know the reason why Turkey refused to be a helpful coalition partner in the fight against ISIS was because Turkey saw Kurdish gains as a greater threat than ISIS. And even now, one of the major issues in the US-Turkey relationship is Turkey's refusal to allow Sweden and Finland into NATO, something that it's doing because Kurds have free speech and the ability to assemble and protest and organize in those countries. So this skewed threat perception that Turkey has, and that the United States has historically materially and financially supported, is now driving Turkey closer to US adversaries and benefiting bad actors around the world. So I think people in Washington are starting to reevaluate the issue. And certainly the response that we had to this interview showed that. We got a lot of interest. A lot of people want to know what the group is saying because they're a relevant political actor in the Middle East. And they've been proactive about not only contributing to the security situation through their role in the fight against ISIS, but also about putting forward plans for a political solution, willingness to engage in a political solution like they were doing from 2013 to 2015. And now with the ceasefire, the decision to make the first move, to take a step that can allow both Turkey and Turkey's allies to have space to engage in some kind of diplomatic resolution. So I think people are starting to understand that here. People were very interested in what he had to say. And we're seeing less of the climate of fear around discussing this conflict and the view that this is an issue of terrorism. This is an issue that can be resolved militarily. That view used to be much more popular in Washington. It's not anymore. The common sense position now is that there needs to be a political solution. And so now that we have leaders, from the Kurdish movement saying there needs to be a political solution, here's what should be in it, and here's the steps that we're going to take to make that happen, of course there's interest in it. And I think that's a positive development.
شكرا جزيلا ميغان.
Thank you.
وفي الختام الشكر لكل متابعي واشنطن أونلاين والنورث بريس. ألقاكم في حلقة جديدة الأسبوع المقبل. إلى اللقاء.